You're goddamn right.
Today we're going to be seeing what Lizzie Answers has to say about feminism, because it's not already abundantly clear what large numbers of feminists think about feminism. Thankfully, Lizzie's included a parental advisory to make sure that we're aware that women are frequently objectified in advertisements, as though men aren't, people aren't. It's they're used to sell products. That's how this works. Fortunately, she's being very clear about her inclusion of certain words only as signifiers of how real sexism is. Well, that's a good thing there, Lizzie, because I intend to be absolutely explicit about it.
Hey guys, it's Lizzie. So today I'm going to talk about feminism and why I'm a feminist, and we're going to start with some definitions.
You're a feminist because it gets you hits on the internet, and because if you weren't, the feminists would come after you, and is there more?
And we're going to start with some definitions. Feminism is a movement for equality between men and women politically, economically, and socially. If you think that women should be treated the same as men in being allowed to run for office and vote, in getting paid the same amount for the same job,
Well, good news, Lizzie. In the first world, it is totally fine for women to drive, to vote, to have jobs that pay equally to men. In fact, I am unaware of any single legal right that women in the first world are denied that men are afforded. But I'm sure you're going to do your best to educate my white, cis, hetero, privileged self.
and if you think of women as having equal worth to men and being equally capable as men, then you're a feminist.
I've got some bad news for you, Lizzie. I have seen cases where feminism does not, in fact, treat men and women as equals. The fact that 1 in 5 boys will be diagnosed as ADHD and prescribed Schedule II medications that can cause severe psychological and physical dependence. How about affirmative consent laws, under which a woman may claim that alcohol consumption abrogated her ability to grant informed consent, but no such protections are afforded to the men in the situation? How about lobbying by feminists to establish or to abolish all custodial criminal sentencing of women, which exacerbates an already pronounced criminal sentencing bias? How about the National Organization of Women lobbying against shared parenting as the default in contested cases, in the face of studies that show that shared custody is in the best interests of the child? How about feminists that advocate for locking men in camps, much like some very, very troublesome ideologies did about 80 years ago for other groups that were not considered human?
I think in general, feminism is a movement that's empowering everyone, men and women, to stop viewing people based upon their gender and like putting them in a box and being like, because you're a woman or because you're a man, you're this, and instead just viewing every single person as a unique individual.
Feminism treats people as unique individuals with intrinsic value. That explains these shirts. That explains the sudden eruption of identity politics on the internet and in news media. That explains why and this list is not exhaustive, but there are white feminists, trans exclusionary radical feminists, sex worker exclusionary feminists, second, third, and fourth wave feminists, intersectional feminists, male allies, male feminists, and all of the other 31 and a half flavors of feminism. In fact, feminism is so universally empowering that we've had things like the poison M&M analogy, where men are assumed to be the only sexual predators in society and women are never predatory. That is so empowering to men to be considered to be the only rapists ever, at all.
The progressive movement of the late 19th and early 20th century made a lot of social changes.
You are absolutely correct, Lizzie. First wave feminism sure did inspire a lot of social changes. Not only were some of the suffragette groups terrorist, but by the end of the suffrage movement, they had ensured that American men had to sign away their bodily autonomy before they're legally permitted to drink, in order to have access to post-secondary loans and grants, to stay out of prison, to retain the right to vote, and to avoid huge fines. And that's just at the federal level. Some states also have additional penalties.
One of those was the women's suffrage movement. In 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, and that gave women the right to vote. Right now, women can vote in every country except for Saudi Arabia and Vatican City.
Fortunately, I'm here to give you a quick history lesson, Lizzie. As of 1890, in Wyoming, women could vote, and in Colorado, 1893. And 75 years prior to the 19th Amendment, there were women granted the right to vote in Britain if they owned sufficient property, while many men were still not allowed to vote because they didn't own jack shit.
Something else to think about politically is that there's a massive underrepresentation of women in our government. Women occupy 19.3% of the House seats and only 20% of Senate seats. We've never had a female president, and only 3 of the 9 Supreme Court justices are women. 2 of them were recently added within the past 10 years.
Well, the socialization argument aside, Lizzie, it's entirely possible that women don't see the long hours and intense stress of public office, as well as the massive public scrutiny, to be well balanced against any personal need or desire that they may have to be a parent or to have a personal life of any description that is not combed through by media and paparazzi.
Because there's so few women who are in elected office positions, it's sending this subliminal message to young girls and even to women who are my age that men do leadership positions, that men run the government.
I think that what that demonstrates, Lizzie, is that men and women have different priorities in their lives. In the most egalitarian societies in the world, places like Sweden, women still prioritize nurturing caregiving roles at home over the possibility of being high-paid engineers and C-level staff. However, men in those same countries still prioritize being primary wage earners and being highly productive individuals.
I don't think it's that women don't want to run for office. I think it's just that we're taught growing up that that's not really what women do.
Sorry, Lizzie. See the previous point.
Because there's so few women who are in elected office positions, it's sending this subliminal message to young girls and even to women who are my age that men do leadership positions, that men run the government. I don't think it's that women don't want to run for office. I think it's just that we're taught growing up that that's not really what women do. The reason that we need feminism is that sexism is something that we're socialized to accept as young children, and we grow up having these preconceived notions about the world and about gender roles that aren't true. And it's this vicious cycle where young girls are not seeing females in these leadership positions as much, and then they think that that's not even an option for them or something that they want to aspire to. And so what feminism does is it kind of comes in and it messes up that cycle of inequality.
Well, conveniently, it's not like feminists demanded that countries put more women in C-level offices and legally enforce gender diversity in the workplace, or attempted to repeal affirmative action laws when it became obvious that men were the disadvantaged group. Oh, that's right, they did.
Economically, so I think that this is the most simple one. It's basically just that females should get paid the same amount as males for doing the same job.
Lizzie, the wage gap has been debunked repeatedly. It does not exist. What exists is a personal prioritization of comfort versus earning power. If you want to come to my job and get the same training I have and work anywhere up to several hundred feet in the air, lifting up to 40 to 60 pounds at a time in all sorts of inclement weather, working day shift, night shift, sometimes at great distances from your home, in living in work camps, you are more than entitled to earn the exact same wage I do, because I'm in a union and they guarantee all people with the same training the exact same wages, assuming they work the same hours, they get paid the same money. That's how this works.
Economically, so I think that this is the most simple one. It's basically just that females should get paid the same amount as males for doing the same job. In the United States, and I'm sure it's even worse in developing countries and in other parts of the world, we make 78 cents to every dollar that men make. To put this into a real picture of something that happened, there's a movie that came out called American Hustle, and the movie company is Sony, and they accidentally had their economic tax records leaked out, and we found out that the female leads of the movie, Jennifer Lawrence and Amy Adams, were paid less than their male co-stars just because they're female. female. This same company has two co-presidents of production, so it's the same exact job, and they have one female and one male working it. And the female, who's the co of this guy, makes $1 million less than him a year, just because of her gender.
Citation needed. Citation needed. Do you have anything that actually demonstrates that it is a gendered decision on who makes more and not tenure or amount of time at the office or anything else? Because otherwise you're just throwing rocks with nothing to back it up.
Social equality. So this is the biggest one that I see talked about in the media and in the news. It's just the sense that women are viewed as being inferior to men.
What media are you watching where women are portrayed as being inferior to men? I mean, if a show wants to demonstrate that a man is absolutely irredeemable, he's violent towards women, especially sexually violent. And it's not as though there's not things like Men Are the Expendable Gender, Faceless Mooks, Red Shirt Army, etc. on tvtropes.org, or going all the way back to stuff like Archie Bunker, where the husband or father is demonstrated to be just an absolutely clueless, hapless buffoon.
Social equality. So this is the biggest one that I see talked about in the media and in the news. It's just the sense that women are viewed as being inferior to men.
I notice you left out the insults like virgin, neckbeard, basement dweller, loser, creep, mama's boy. I mean, it's almost as though you think that slurs and insults are solely gendered, and it's not as though they're designed to strike at emotional weak points of an individual in order to excite a reaction.
Another part of social inequality is that women are constantly objectified. In advertisements, music videos, pornography, women are sexualized. And I don't have a problem with sexualizing women. I understand that we all are sexual beings, but the problem is that women are being sexualized way more than men.
First off, I'm going to need you to defend your assertion that women are inherently massively more objectified and sexualized than men. I'm thinking back to the Twilight moms, the women in their 30s and 40s who were objectifying a 17-year-old male. I'm thinking to all of the various ad campaigns that you didn't show where it's just about a guy in tight shorts. And concerning your complaint about pornography, if a woman has enough agency to monetize her sexuality, then what difference does it make to you unless you're being asked to be included?
Sending a message that men and women are equal sexually, the message that the Bible shows.
No offense, Lizzie, but if you're going to the Bible for sexual advice, you're doing it wrong. And if you're going to the Bible for advice on relationship equality, you are definitely doing it wrong. I have no idea what any significant amount of the Bible has to do with relationship equality if you want to be a feminist, because that's that whole thing that feminists go on and on about. It's patriarchy writ large in a supposedly holy text.
This is something that leads to females having so many insecurities.
Whoa. Back that bus up. Males have had a massive increase in body image issues over the last 3 decades. Women certainly do not have the market cornered on body insecurity issues. And some massive part of it plays into how men are objectified in media. So no, this is not just about one gender being objectified. This is about inadequate representation of all body types in media.
Number 3 is that we're taught that we need a man and that we need to find our value in a relationship with a guy.
Men that choose to not pursue relationships tend to be stigmatized just as much as women that don't want to have relationships. I mean, it's no better to be a bachelor than a spinster. And funny enough, there's women crying, "Where have all the good men gone?" Well, they've gotten tired of being hectored and badgered by feminists, and they've pulled out of society. And so far as needing somebody else, no, you don't need anybody else, but having a partner means it's easier to pay bills, it's easier to buy a house. If you choose to have children, it's in the best interest of the child to have 2 loving parents. It's not like it hasn't had some value over the last, entirety of human evolutionary history.
Sexual harassment and rape culture is another part of social inequality.
Oh, you mean the rape culture where victims of sexual violence are ignored and erased and don't have services and are laughed at and are told that they wanted it. And yeah, except that in the US, males are not tracked or treated as victims of rape if they're forced to penetrate. Sorry, feminism is not living up to the bar of equality on that one either.
Rape culture is the idea that no means yes.
I'm not sure what culture you're living in, Lizzie, but according to the state legislatures of New York and California, which have passed yes means yes legislation, any alcohol consumption on the part of a woman abrogates her ability to grant informed consent, and males may be forced to demonstrate that they had affirmative consent at all points throughout the engagement, but there's no actual requirement for women to do the same. And men do not lose their right to grant informed consent upon intoxication, which means that these laws have already been questioned as unconstitutional.
Also, globally, 30% of women report to have experienced physical or sexual abuse from their partner who they're in a relationship with, and 35% of women in the world have experienced sexual violence or been raped in their lifetime.
That totally explains why men on college campuses are having their due process rights eroded and they're being subjected to kangaroo courts on college campuses when they're not being found criminally responsible for an act, yet they're still being expelled for the allegation of sexual misconduct. That explains why Senator Paulus said that it's better to eject 8 students who are not guilty than to let 2 where there's even a 20 to 30% chance that they did do anything wrong be permitted to remain in a college, because it doesn't ruin anybody's lives to be accused of sexual misconduct. It's not like they can't just go to another college. So what is it? Are we going to move these predators around like the Catholic Church did? Or are we actually going to allow the legal system to prosecute legitimate cases of sexual assault properly?
Also, globally, 30% of women report to have experienced physical or sexual abuse from their partner who they're in a relationship with, and 35% of women in the world have experienced sexual violence or been raped in their lifetime. 130 million women in the world have been forced to go through genital cutting, which occurs mainly in Islamic countries, and it prevents women from being able to find pleasure in sex, power over women by taking away their sexuality. And this is something that was really shocking and sad to me, which doesn't just take place in China, but in China, there's 39,000 baby girls who weren't taken care of in their first year of life and died because of that. I'll link the news story below that talks about like this national pandemic, but there's like millions of girls that aren't alive right now because their parents didn't think them worthy of medical care that like.
And what you're not mentioning is that throughout most of war-torn Africa, there are rape camps that victimize men. And something else that you're not mentioning is that men are the primary victims of warfare because they're primarily the ones fighting. Yeah, you know what? It sucks to live in a third world country. It's a good thing you don't, isn't it?
130 million women in the world have been forced to go through genital cutting, which occurs mainly in Islamic countries, and it prevents women from being able to find pleasure in sex, power over women by taking away their sexuality.
Again, you're leaving things out. So, according to this first image, if roughly 30% of the global male population is circumcised, and we assume that roughly 3.5 billion people on the planet, roughly half of them are male, that means that roughly 1 billion men have been circumcised. That is still infant genital mutilation. As of fairly recently, there are a lot of countries that have outlawed female genital mutilation of any description, infant or otherwise. There are a handful of countries that have gone so far as to ban all infant genital mutilation, most of them Nordic. In fact, most other countries don't even consider it an issue.
Also, so many female babies are aborted because they are female babies.
Citation needed. I've cut out a reasonable chunk of anecdotal stuff where Lizzie goes on and talks about how her parents have a wonderful relationship and they've never treated either of their daughters as inferior in any way, and they've always supported them, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it sounds like you have great parents, which is totally awesome. However, you do live in the US, and your world is a hell of a lot better than all of these appeals to greater problems. Yes, you've gone to Thailand. Was that mission so that you could bring feminism to the women of Thailand, or were you there to spread the word of God?
Something else that I wanted to end with that is social inequality. I experience so often in the United States is the idea that emotions are weak and that having emotions makes you lesser and inferior. I'm someone who has extreme emotions, so I have these big feelings, and I've been called crazy and emotionally bipolar by guys because of my emotions.
And one more time getting on that, let's leave a bunch of shit out train with Lizzie. So, it's not just women that are stereotyped as being weak, with big old air quotes, for being emotional. Men are frequently socialized as children that boys don't cry, toughen up, grow a pair, you're a big boy now, and all of these other things. It's not as though you are being singled out and told you're crazy. Being unnecessarily and irrationally emotional, as in big emotions, can be considered crazy. There's a reason for that, because it's irrational and it's irrelevant to the situation at hand. So I've cut another portion where she related anecdotal information and was very repetitive. She goes on and on and on about how all the boys she knows have all the same emotions as girls, and boys being socialized to not be emotionally demonstrative is somehow indicative of the lesser value placed on emotions as opposed to rationality. Now, evolutionary psychology probably explains some portion of why males are socialized to be less emotionally demonstrative. And being able to examine the world around you rationally permits you to make balanced, logical decisions about the world around you. That might be why it's relatively prized, as opposed to always being emotional about everything and going, oh my God, I need a trigger warning. And that's really all I can handle. So I'm going to cut it off there. That was actually most of her video. So I'd like to thank you for stopping by. I'd like to thank you for your time and your energy, putting up with my rambling and her repetitiveness. And I want you to give yourselves a big round of applause for putting up with her making a complete hash of what feminism is really about. Subscribe, follow me on Twitter, whatever. Doesn't really matter to me. I'm going to make videos whether you like it or not.